Hello, everyone. We want to welcome you back to the conference. We really had such a great morning and we're very excited to keep things going this afternoon. I just want to reintroduce myself. My name is Daniela Ortiz. I am a fourth-year medical student here at the University of Michigan. I'm also one of the Diversity in Medicine board members. I identify as biracial Black Latina, and today I am wearing a striped light blue shirt. I use she, her pronouns and also identify as a cisgender woman. I'm really excited to be joined by some of my co-medical students here at the University of Michigan for our next panel. They will be talking about the Student Diversity Council, which they're all members of. And this panel is going to explore the experience of establishing the Student Diversity Council at our school, and will also give the students perspective on how groups like this can support allyship in their communities. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, but before I do that, I would like to mention that we do recognize that this panel is made up of students all from one institution, and so we're really excited to hear from all of you from other institutions in the chat, in the Q&A, to really open up this discussion. I'll turn it over to our panelists now to introduce themselves, and I want to start with Sammy Lyons.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is Sammy Lyons. As Danielle has mentioned, I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. I identify as a white cisgender female without a visible disability. And I am seated wearing a short sleeve purple dress, though you can only see the top, long brown hair, thin gold rimmed glasses, and some beige brown boards behind me. Thank you for having me.
Hannah, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for having me. My name is Hannah Glick. I use she, her pronouns. I am a rising fourth-year medical student at the University of Michigan and a current dual degree Master's of Public Health student also at the School of Public Health at Michigan. I think I already mentioned I use she, her pronouns. I identify as a white cisgender Jewish woman. I am seated today wearing a University of Michigan navy blue quarter zip, and I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you, Hannah. Serena, can you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Serena Bidwell. I'm a third-year medical student here at the University of Michigan. I use the she, her pronouns, and I am an able-bodied cisgender woman. I identify as a biracial Taiwanese American.
Thank you. And Kavya?
Hi everyone, my name is Kavya Devaluri. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an M3 at the University of Michigan Medical School, planning on getting my MBA next year and applying into OB-GYN. I identify as an Asian, Indian American, cisgender, able-bodied woman, and I'm seated with wearing a University of Michigan Patagonia with a white room in the background.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Gracia.
Hi everyone, my name is Gracia Quiroga and I'm a third-year medical student at the University of Michigan Medical School. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I identify as an able-bodied cisgender Latina woman, and today I'm wearing a pink blouse and I have a diversity in medicine background. Thanks for inviting us to be here.
Amazing, thank you all. So the first question I have for the panel is, can you explain what the Student Diversity Council is, and what are the group's goals and missions within our medical school community? And Sammy, I'd like to start it off with you.
Sure, I'll give a little bit of brief background, and then I'd also like to hear from Hannah because she is kind of the original chair amongst the several chairs that are in this group as well. But the Student Diversity Council is one of the two governing councils at the University of Michigan Medical School, and the goal of the council is to create and ensure the sustainability of a culturally humble and inclusive environment for all students. And the council engages in this type of work through primarily education, outreach, and activism. Originally, the Student Diversity Council, which we might refer to periodically as the SDC, consisted of various student organizations and representatives from those groups to form the collective body. It has since evolved in the last couple of years to have a more defined structure. And currently we have a chair, vice chairs, and representatives within each of the three tenets of education, outreach, and activism. We also have two advisors, 1 staff and 1 faculty, and guidance is also provided by the Director of Medical Student Programs through the Office of Health Equity and Inclusion that is within Michigan Medicine and oversees a lot of the diversity efforts within the health system. And I think Hannah has a little bit more of the original backstory, since prior to me being chair in 2021 and Serena as the new chair for this year, 2022, I think Hannah was the chair during her first year of medical school.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide a little bit of historical background to the Student Diversity Council as I joined as an M1. So originally the council was formed, I think, back in 2014 by a group of students who operated in different sort of identity groups, as we call them, but their goal was to sort of form an alliance and sort of work together to support each other. So we have a lot of different, as we call them, identity groups at the University of Michigan, as I imagine a lot of other medical schools and graduate schools do. And we wanted to be able to sort of respond and support each other, both when negative events happen, but also celebrate positive events within each other's communities. And so we originally were a council with different representatives from each sort of organizations, and we worked together and met and supported each other. And then back in 2020, that's sort of when Sammy mentioned the council was reshaped and reformed.
Awesome. Thank you both for that background. I'll just open it up to the rest of the panelists if you want to add anything additional about your experience with SDC.
I think Hannah already touched on this a little bit, but one thing we're really focused on this coming year is building collaborations across the institution. So whether that's with other student groups, whether that's with departments or our Office of Health Equity and Inclusion, and kind of figuring out how we can all partner together to continue amplifying each other's voices.
To add in, I think one of the things that really allows the Student Diversity Council to be as involved and as impactful as it has been able to be these past few years in our medical school community truly is the collaborations that we have built thus far with our student council and with the administration. I think the onus at a lot of institutions always ends up becoming the medical students' responsibility to continue to advance issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in ways that often tend to be reactive or responsive to issues that medical students are experiencing. But as much as student organizations have that responsibility and it ends up becoming on us, I think it's invaluable the amount of institutional support and buy-in that we have both from our faculty and our staff advisors as well as the administration at large.
I think one last point too that I like to share about SDC is I think it's really cool as a way of also kind of having a lot of institutional memory, because I think in previous panel, one of the panelists was talking about how we need to make sure that the work that we do as students and that we collaborate with other student orgs, even with faculty, is never lost, but continues to build on itself and continues to grow. So I think STC, especially now with like new like revamp and things, is moving towards like being, you know, that institutional memory, so that all these projects and efforts that all of our wonderful students here at the University of Michigan kind of take on is never lost, and it just continues to like build on each other so we can continue to improve as an institution.
Thank you. I think that's such an important point. As I transition to this next question, I want to give a bit of background. So I know in this space that we're all very passionate about diversity and health equity, something that can be sometimes tricky to navigate, but is so crucial is allyship and how we work within the space of allyship. And I think that's a big role that SDC plays within our community. And so for the panelists, I'm wondering, how can we as medical students work as allies for our underrepresented medicine peers? And what more can we be doing? And this is for any panelist, whoever wants to jump in.
Oh, happy to start us off. So I think there's a difference between working with and working for our peers. And I think that comes across in a lot of the activities we have done with Student Diversity Council and how it has been able to flourish and at least continue on with each year, because we have turnover of students every single year. And that can be one of the hardest parts, is sustainability of not only projects, but also organizations as a whole, especially given different socio-political events that happen and the trauma that ensues from that. And so sometimes there are times where identities are more helpful and other times where they are not. And then we can also be in spaces where we might have greater emotional and physical safety in other circumstances, and then trying to learn how and when we can lean into those spaces and lean into different identities that may be more helpful in certain circumstances is very helpful. But it's also critical to ensuring that our community lasts and stays strong, and that this work we can do as people and then as future residents is able to be continued. And I think it's very real, not only for just burnout in medicine as a whole for the specialties that we go into, but burnout can happen in this type of work as well. And so finding that delicate balance where we can continue to be allies, but we can also continue to be medical students. And I think that sometimes gets very hard when, as Serena was saying before, and Kavya as well, of sometimes the onus gets put too much onto students, and trying to figure out how we can engage those partners a little bit better, I think is very important.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think one of the most important parts of being an ally is to learn how to listen really well and how to let others' voices be heard before your own. The Student Diversity Council is in a pretty unique situation where we have direct access to our deans and our administration on a regular basis. And so it's important for us to make sure that we're passing that space and the microphone to other groups who might not have as easy access or might have things to share without that connection directly to our administration.
And I think that the structure of SDC really lends itself to that, passing along the microphone and really allowing us to utilize our platform to empower other student groups. I think if you look at the link that Sammy threw in the chat, but also I can explain it verbally, is that SDC has a structure both where we have our own sort of hierarchy where we're working on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in the 3 pillars of activism, outreach, and education. But in addition to that, we have sort of a consortium model where we have different affinity groups or different organizations within the University of Michigan Medical School who perhaps may not identify directly with diversity, equity, and inclusion in sort of the mission of their organization, but they do want it to be a core tenet in their work. And so they can be part of our general body where they are plugged in with the resources that we have, and we are able to solicit support that they might need from their organizational perspective and then pass that along. And so we really have this sort of double-armed, 3-pronged, all the metaphors, sort of structure that allows us to both work independently and in collaboration with different student organizations.
Great, thank you so much. I want to touch back to a theme that has recurred throughout the conference today, and that's appreciating challenges and how we can learn from them. So I'd love to hear from you all. What type of challenges have you experienced in this space, and how has that guided either future efforts for SDC or things that you changed recently? Anyone, again, is welcome to take this question.
I can chime in. I am the vice chair of education within the Student Diversity Council. And so I work with Gracia and a lot of our other peers focusing in on aspects of our curriculum, both extracurricularly and curricularly, that could be optimized from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint. And I think that there has been immense support from a lot of the administration about how we can continue to advance our curriculum and ensure that we are creating physicians that are very tuned into issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as justice and advocacy. But there are always members in any community that are a little bit more hesitant for change and a little bit more happy with the way that things are currently being done, or perhaps if it's an administrator or a faculty member that's been at our community for a very long time and they've sort of established their methodology for doing things or conducting a specific type of exam or lecture, they might be a little bit more resistant to change. And it's always hard, as I mentioned before, when the onus of responsibility is put upon students, but we aren't trained in a lot of the things that have to be changed. Like if I want to change the curriculum, I don't have a PhD in education, I don't have any formal training. And so it ends up being a very grassroots effort that I think sometimes can be viewed as very immature or too grassroots to really formally be accepted by the administration or particular faculty members. And so it is something that we both view as a strength is our administrative support, but then there's definitely a couple members of our community that I think are a little bit more hesitant or just would prefer to see the data a little bit clearer before they make any sort of wide sweeping changes. So that's been something that we've had to navigate, but we've had plenty of support in doing that.
I can also add, and this is coming from my role both as now the incoming chair of Student Diversity Council, but also I'm a class representative for our student council. And I think one challenge that we have faced is sometimes the opinion of a group is actually the minority opinion, and wanting a change for the minority can be difficult to express and to get traction for at the administrative level. And so kind of voicing why certain changes are important, I think has been both a challenge and a great opportunity for us to learn how to better advocate for our peers. Specifically thinking about, how when a change impacts a small group, how do we share that that's important to make the change? And I think one thing that I've really leaned on is saying that this institution really prides itself in having a diverse community. And if we're going to have a diverse community, then we need to support the diverse members. And that might mean that different students have different needs. So if we're not supporting each of our students' needs, then we're not really doing our job in promoting that diverse community in the end.
I love what Kavya and Serena said, and I had pre-written some like prep notes for this, and it was exactly what I had written down, which I think shows you a lot about the community that gets formed within the council and getting on the same page, because if you're on the same page as a team, you can be more effective versus if everyone's in all these different places. And so that doesn't mean having the same opinion about everything and having the space where you can disagree with each other, but it's making sure that you're all working to try to move the needle in a similar direction. And to what Kavya was saying too about the analogy of some of the things just should be more of the institution's role, right? And I like to think of residency and how you wouldn't have a medical student performing a surgery solo. And so a lot of these issues, we're still learning. We're not experts. We're trying to figure it out. And that's when we need to tap into the experts, need to tap into our attendings. And so we lean onto our advisors, we lean onto different faculty members, people from the Office of Health, Equity, and Inclusion. And part of that also, though, is setting clear boundaries of what we can and cannot do, or should and should not do, and what that advocacy looks like. And so if we're not clear about the boundaries that we have for ourselves or have for the council or have with the different relationships between the deans and the Office of Health, Equity, and Inclusion, our advisors, then we get into spaces that are not uncomfortable, but unsafe. And it's okay to be uncomfortable, but it's not okay to be unsafe. And so if we can be clear about the communication we have, that expectation setting with each other before we even start engaging in conversations around advocacy work, I think then we can move faster and move further.
Thank you. I really appreciate all of that insights. I'm going to pivot to our next question, and this is actually bouncing off of something, Serena, that you mentioned earlier, that, such a strong part of advocacy is amplifying and lifting others' voices. And so I'm wondering, for you in this council as the SDC, what lessons have you learned by trying to amplify the voices of our peers who are actually having the lived experience that we might not have as people that are just trying to, protect and support, but might not always identify ourselves within the groups that we're trying to help? And so I'll turn this over to Hannah first, but anyone is welcome to answer.
I think one of the most important lessons that I've personally learned about this, especially in the context of sort of a medical school curriculum, is that oftentimes we or students often operate in silos. And one thing that I've learned is that building this community through the SDC has allowed us to move out of those silos and sort of move together and work together. I think amplifying voices comes in a lot of different ways. And the most important thing that we can do is listen to our peers and listen to the community. For the outreach branch of the Student Diversity Council, we've sort of taken under the general body, which is a collection of student organizations, whether they be identity groups or like interest groups for certain careers, sort of like Kavya mentioned. And we need to respond to their feedback. We held these meetings because we wanted students to be able to come in, learn what the SDC was doing, be transparent about our work, but also hear what's needed from students. And we've needed to sort of reshape that. And each year as student leaders, I think we need to reassess the community, because something that might have worked in the last year might not work for the next year going forward, or something might change in the world. Over the last 3 years, we've experienced a lot, and we've had to make changes so that we can support the community. So listening to each other and responding is a really important thing that I've learned over the last few years in the SDC.
Yeah, I want to jump in because I think I was thinking about something very similarly to what Hannah was kind of mentioning about how I think we often do work in silos, but I do really appreciate how SDC has kind of pushed to having a more collaborative environment. And I think one main thing that I've really learned in like being in this space and just like in general about amplifying voices is just being really in tune about like what you do know, what you don't know, and like what you don't know, like don't try to just like take over a space because you have a certain leadership role, but really like pull in the people who like do know about that experience and like have that lived experience and like use, you know, your collaboration skills to really build something. Because I think kind of what Hannah was saying too, even like though we went through similar things, let's say even just like with our M1 curriculum and like going through M2, M3, and 4, what we experience is very different just because things are always evolving, but also because of our own identities that we hold and the experiences that we have. So we see things in our curriculum very differently, even though we might experience the exact same thing. And so I always think in like my role for like academic like representative is really like I experienced it a certain way because of my identities, like as a Latina, as a woman, etc. But I need to be mindful of like what else is missing, what else am I not seeing, and you know, really being intentional about like asking and like hearing and creating opportunities for people to kind of like give that feedback. And so I made it very intentional, I think, for me this year of like really talking to the first years and saying like, hey, I experienced this when I was a first year in the curriculum, but I recognize that that's not probably the same thing that you're experiencing. And I want to hear from you and like work with you together so that we can improve it, you know? And so, because I recognize that I don't know everything and I don't know maybe what things might need to be improved, but I want to make sure that everyone's perspective is being incorporated. So I think that's really something that I've learned about just like always asking yourself like what else is out there that I'm not recognizing.
Amazing. We have some awesome questions coming in right now from the Q&A. I'd like to start with this one. How do we divide up this work? Everyone has their roles, but a lot of this work blends together well. This work is also incredibly taxing and sometimes traumatic. In my institution, I found myself burning out in this work, especially when so few students are leading the effort. How do you encourage leadership in others, encourage collaboration, and compensate others that need to address other medical student demands? How do we weed out the other students who want to participate but don't put in the work? What are your thoughts on this? And Kavya, I see you're starting to type an answer. Would you mind voicing some answers to these?
Yeah, definitely. I think those are a lot of questions, but they're all very valid ones. And I think they are ones that we have asked ourselves numerous times, especially as, you know, like Gracie mentioned with institutional memory and turnover. I think we've been very fortunate in that Sammy, Hannah, and I have been part of SDC for a number of years. And as more people have come on in the coming years, we've been able to sort of explain what has worked well in the past and what needs to continue to be optimized and improve. So I think that one thing that really lends itself well to allowing us to be effective in this area is really the structure that we have within SDC. And I think that if you look at the link that Sammy shared in the chat, you can see what our organizational structure is like. And that really allows for clear assignments of roles, responsibilities, and goals that people should have. And I think that one that really empowers people when they're coming on and taking a role. Like when Gracia took on like the academic representative role, she really clearly knew like my job is to focus on the curriculum, the formalized structured curriculum that we have at our medical school and how that can be optimized. And that allows her to, you know, better connect with people that work in that domain, to connect with people within the Office of Medical Student Education or people who coordinate our clinical skills curriculum. And then also it sort of allows for better reporting back to the rest of the group in terms of like understanding like who am I responsible to, or who's waiting on me, and who's expecting me to accomplish this particular task. And then I think other components are when you're recruiting people for this type of organization, I think being able to, it's really hard to tell in an application how passionate and enthusiastic someone is going to be. And I think that offering interviews, I think, is something that we have gone back and forth between about being able, because it's also hard to tell how engaged someone might be if they present themselves as super engaged and enthusiastic in an interview. You know, medical students are busy. We have step exams, we have clerkships, we have shelf exams. And so it's really hard to gauge how engaged someone might be. And so being able to give each other grace, and I think being able to support one another through all those, the tumultuous times that medical school inherently offers us, are some of the things that have worked well. So I would say our structure, trying to find people who are very engaged and enthusiastic and have ideas from the get-go, and then giving each other a lot of grace.
Yeah, I think if I could jump in just super briefly to sort of piggyback off of what Kavya said, I think we're really fortunate at the University of Michigan to have a lot of really passionate students who have put in truly hundreds of hours of work into the Student Diversity Council. And when it first got started, although we have this really wonderful structure now, when it first got started, it was difficult to sort of get that institutional buy-in. Dr. Okunlami was a fantastic faculty advisor. So I think if there's someone at your institution who you know is super passionate about DEI work, it's worth reaching out, seeing how they feel. I think in terms of burnout for this work, like I mentioned, we're putting in tons of uncompensated hours. And although we're passionate about it, it's still hard. We have step exams, we have ICU sub-Is, things like that, like Kavya already mentioned. But I think in addition to creating a community within the school as a whole, we've created a really cool individual sort of SDC community where we all really do support each other. You know, the chairs will write down when someone's taking step 1 or step 2, and we'll know that they're going to be a little bit more offline during those weeks. Sammy wrote down everyone's birthday when she was chair and made a point to say happy birthday to everyone. It's little things like that. And so I think building that community helps take away from some of the burnout that we experience when this work can be hard and challenging as well.
I love that. I want to pivot to another question we have coming from the audience in the Q&A. I believe this was in response to the conversation we were having about amplifying other people's voices. This attendee asked, how do you check yourselves in the privileges that you do have? This attendee does not want to promote an oppression Olympics of who has it worse, but rather is wondering about what best practices have you found in guiding the work you do to follow the SDC mission?
This is hard. This is an excellent question, but I think I had so many meetings with the faculty advisors, the staff advisors, the deans, and going through how I presented myself in a space. Did I take up too much verbal space? How was my physical space through the Zoom? A lot of the conversations we have weren't in person. And am I making sure that I'm hearing the different voices and having those people who also had the emotional capacity and time to lean into was so important for me. And when I was the chair this past year, and then when I was the representative for community engagement in the year beforehand, because I knew that no matter what I was going to do, it was going to be challenging, and I wasn't going to please everybody, but I wanted to figure out a way where I could find that middle spot where people might disagree with me, people might agree with me, but they still respected me as a person who was trying to do their best. And so finding for checking the privileges and figuring out how your identities are impacting your work in a space, for me, it was really leaning into other people. And I needed those people to help learn about it and making sure that they also were in a good space to provide some constructive feedback for me. So for me, that was every single week practically of figuring out how can I do better with the identities that I have, trying to lead this group well.
I think Gracia did a really good job speaking sort of to this point earlier as well. I think being honest with yourself about what you do and do not know is probably one of the most important parts of being within this work. And then on top of that, I think when we're reaching out to other students, other faculty, other staff who are putting in this work, and it is often uncompensated, as I've kind of mentioned more than once, listening to them if they don't have the capacity to help. I think that's super important. So it's not an easy answer. But I think starting off by being honest with yourself about who you are, what your privileges are, and then in each scenario, like Gracia mentioned, what do I do? What do I know? What do I not know? And who can I talk to help educate me best on this topic?
Great, thank you guys. We have another really interesting question from an attendee in the Q&A. They ask, how do you reinforce collaboration when you find out that silos have been reestablished after you've successfully broken them down? Has this happened at your institution, and what approaches did you take?
I can chime in. It might seem super simple, but I just think like reaching out and like talking to people, like once you know, like let's say you have a similar idea. And actually, I feel like this has happened recently where, you know, within SDC, there was like an idea of how can we best support like all students across, you know, M1s through M4s, but especially our M1s who are kind of going through this curriculum for the first time. And a lot of emotions can come up that sometimes are hard to grapple with challenging material related to DEI or even not. And so I think within that, we were kind of thinking like, how can we best support? How can us as like M2s and 3s and 4s who have gone through that like help debrief? How can we help with like reflection spaces, but also incorporating like talking about how like DEI does or does not come up in these lectures that students go through. And then, you know, come to find out that similar work is being done because our school is amazing and full of like amazing individuals who have really great ideas. And so another group was kind of already thinking about the same thing. And it was honestly just a matter of saying like, hey, like I really love your idea and actually thinking the same thing. Like, how would you like to just chat about it and see, you know, what we can do if there's like a space for us to kind of collaborate, work together, use our strengths, like with the people that you know that you're connected with, the things that you have kind of seen, and then like what I was thinking and kind of like work from that and build something. And I think just being like very open and just like offering a conversation and acknowledging that like you also like are wanting to, you know, work on it together is super key with like collaborating, I think, in general. So I think that has been really good and it's been positive, and you know there's going to be more conversations about this like into the future, so it's really exciting to see how collaboration can go a long way. But yeah, I think honestly, just if you hear of something, just like don't be afraid to reach out, don't be afraid to ask to collaborate. I think more often than not, people are always really excited to want to collaborate on projects because I think it makes for even bigger and better things.
Yeah, I definitely echo everything that Gracie just said. We had a similar situation where within the SDC, we were working on improving mentorship for specifically students from underrepresented backgrounds at our medical school. And then we found out that there was also a mentorship task force that had formed with students and faculty looking at mentorship for all medical students, but also particularly looking at primary care mentorship. And so we actually, you know, found out that they had done a survey already. So we looked at the survey results with them. Now we're collaborating and kind of each working on our piece of mentorship with the hopes that at the end, the overall mentorship landscape for our school will improve. And so I think just encouraging the open conversations and making sure that your work is getting out there so that people know what you're doing and who to connect with if they have similar ideas.
And just to tack on one more thing, I think when you have an idea, like, you know, with the situation that Gracia mentioned, like we had an idea and then we found out that another group was already working on it. And I think that and it was fantastic that they were super supportive of collaboration. But I think that if you are coming up with an idea, putting out feelers to see if there's any other groups that want to collaborate on it. Like when we were talking about creating reflective spaces for our M1 students who are going through the curriculum, the idea was, should we loop in like our Black Medical Student Association? Should we include in our Latin American and Native American Medical Student Association, like bringing in these different affinity groups to create collaboration from the get-go, from the inception of the idea itself, so that it never has to be that collaboration is an afterthought, but it's something that you sort of integrate into the fabric of your efforts and your projects and your overarching culture. And I think that sort of prevents the silos and it reinforces collaborations that you have and sort of lends itself to institutional memory.
Thank you so much. I want to close our panel. You guys have been truly amazing, and you really make me proud to be a Michigan Med student alongside all of you. I want to close with the last question from our Q&A, which I think is a very important question to answer. How do you measure the success of a diversity council or similar organizations and know what your impact is? How do you identify areas of improvement at the end of each year? And I'm going to turn to Sammy to answer this question.
I would love to hear from other folks here in this panel too, but when I saw this, I jumped at it, and I learned from a brilliant man, hey, Dr. O, that the success of a diversity council is that we wouldn't even need one in the first place. Ideally, the Student Diversity Council doesn't need to exist, because if the environment in which you are in at your school keeps all students safe and comfortable and allows them to be able to grow and not have to deal with the trauma of everything else that they have to experience because of who they are, then that is a full good institution. We're not there yet. That's not our reality. That's why we exist. We have to exist because right now, if we didn't, I really truly feel like our community would be having more difficulties than it already does. So wherever you are, finding a faculty or staff member you can trust, use them to identify other students who are interested in this work, or you can help find them yourself. You can also reach out to us and we can help with the network that we have here to identify safe people at your institution. And then just meet regularly. Don't let structure prevent you from forming, and then form your group and figure out how you can integrate also into the structures that you currently have at your place. But for the success of a diversity council would be if we didn't even have to be here, really.
I love that answer, Sammy. I'll just open up for any other panelists if you have last thoughts or any advice for other med students that might be hearing this and really hopeful about starting something similar in their institutions.
I can just close my thoughts off with saying it may seem like we have a ton figured out, but we've worked really hard on this for the last several years. So please reach out if you have any questions. We're all passionate about this, not only at the University of Michigan, but throughout all medical education. And we're excited to be able to share what we've been doing here. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, all. Again, you really make me proud to be a U of M med student with you guys, and I'm really glad that you're open and willing to help share what you've learned with students across the nation. And thank you again for your humble leadership in this space. I now want to turn to Dr. O to introduce our next keynote speaker.